changing tack a little, I want to have a quick look at code compliance officers. How independent do you think they really are?
The code compliance officer has a statutory role. They have a duty to verify their pub company's compliance with the pubs code. I think there is an increasing recognition and respect for the need for the pub owning business code compliance officer to have independence in their role, so that they can bring that challenge and in that way reduce the risk of regulatory action from me. It's a really important role. Now, in the STAR investigation, I found that there was insufficient respect for the need for that role to have independence and the ability to bring robust challenge to code compliance issues. And what I found, in fact, was that the code compliance officer's job description included an objective to ensure that the pubs code was interpreted to the commercial benefit of Heineken UK. Now, I found that was a breach of the pubs code. And so my report on that investigation, which obviously has been considered by all of the other pub owning businesses, I'm sure will have made very clear the potential consequences of not giving sufficient respect to and independence to that role. And it's a difficult role. You know, those code compliance officers are, you know, my eyes and ears in their organisation. And if they don't, they know that if they don't act with sufficient independence and do their job to verify compliance, all they're doing is increasing the risk to their business of an investigation, which of course they don't want. And they are an important tool for their tenants. They're an important tool for me. And, you know, only recently, the code compliance officer from Green King, for example, identified herself a potential breach of the code, conducted her own investigation, reported to me about what she'd found, what the potential breach was, and engaged with me about the action they proposed to take. You know, and that sort of internal challenge is good practice, and that's what I expect pub company code compliance officers to be doing. And at the end of the day, if a tenant doesn't get satisfaction from their code compliance officer, they can come to me.
There's a possible perception, I think, from the tenant's view that the code compliance officer is an employee of the pub company. So we'll work, which exactly they are. And so we'll work with the pub company's best interest at heart. And possibly I think there's steps that we all need to take again, that to try and encourage tenants to refer matters to their code compliance officers and have a faith in the system that I don't believe for many is currently there, because they fear reprisals, they fear upsetting the apple cart, they fear that if they do go to their code compliance officer, that they're going to complain about, it's the policeman policing themselves issue almost. And I think we have some work to do, and I don't know if you agree, in getting over that hurdle. So we've managed to do it.
Well, I do think there's perhaps more the code compliance officers can do themselves in talking to their tenant community directly and building that confidence. But I just reiterate, yes, they are an employee of the pub company, but they have a statutory role to verify compliance with the code. And if that role is not effective, all it does is increase the risk to the pub company of regulatory action from me. So there is a dynamic there that I want tenants to trust, and I want them to know that I am engaging with the pub owning business code compliance officers regularly, And that there are examples, as I've just cited, of good practice where they've helped tenants internally get access to their rights.
Yeah, I agree, and it's a catch-22 situation in many respects, because tenants will not know how independent the co-compliance officer is until they actually use them. And if they don't use them,
also, sorry to interrupt you, that I should also mention, because credit where credit's due, that it's largely down to the code compliance officers that the volume of arbitration referrals in relation to MRO have reduced to the extent that they have. They have been working hard to embed code practices, to embed the my regulatory compliance handbook approaches, to try to get early resolution to these issues, and they've had a measure of success. We're not at the end of the road. Could the system be better? Yes, it could. But I do have to recognise the work that they've done to get us where we are.
I'm glad you've raised MRO, because that's the next area that I want to sort of move towards, if I may. Yeah. Whilst it's not the only reason a tenant will contact your office and your team, a tenant trying to get a market rent, would you say it's fair to say that would make up a great percentage of the work that comes into your office as a referral?
It is still the lion's share of arbitration referrals, yes. And it shouldn't be. So whereas referrals have gone down, they need to go down even more before I'll be satisfied that we've got a really accessible system for tenants. So this is one of the things, as I said, that I might well have got to earlier had it not been for the pandemic. But it's there for me to do now, and I've recently engaged with 50 tied tenants who have gone through the MRO process in the last 2 years. So trying to get an up-to-date picture of where the problems are. That work tells me that there's a very close correlation between getting quality advice and having a positive feeling about the MRO process and the outcome you've got from it. So that just reinforces for me the need to concentrate on ensuring tenants understand the benefits of getting advice. And it also tells me that there are still issues around affordability for tenants accessing the MRO, and that's something I need to consider when I'm looking at my regulatory powers.
Well, I think when you started talking about advice, that's kind of preempted my next question, actually, Fiona. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased here, but it's getting that independent advice that I think is absolutely key. And whilst we are helping a lot of tenants out, it's only a minority of those tenants that are actually coming to seek advice, I believe, at the moment, from independent trade associations like ourselves, and there are others out there. And that concerns me a little bit. I think we need to do more to try and ensure that tenants are getting more advice at renewal or at review.
Look, it's really clear that getting advice about code rights is very important. And it's also true that the market hasn't yet filled the demand for quality advice, including quality advice at a low cost. So I'm really supportive of any measures that that trade bodies want to take to fill that gap. It's absolutely crucial.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't get cheaper than free, which is what the Licensees Association is charging currently. So one of the areas that I think where this actually perhaps could be one of the reasons why tenants aren't seeking advice is when we look at the rent assessment proposal, the RAP, the code says it needs to be signed off by a RICS qualified surveyor. I've always had a bit of a concern about this. I understand the rationale for doing it, but it almost creates a veneer of respectability onto that rent assessment proposal, that RAP, that I think may deter some tenants who aren't RICS qualified and, as we know, are time poor, look at the RAP that's in front of them, go, well, it's been signed off by a RICS qualified surveyor, it must be right, and don't see it as the start of a negotiation, see it almost as a fait accompli.
Well, they should see it as the start of a negotiation, and they should see it as an opportunity to get advice, because the rent assessment proposal happens at the beginning of the rent review process. But what the tenant will also get with it is all of the supporting information that backs up that valuation. So they'll be able to take their opinion and get their advice about what that supporting information should mean for the rent, and go into the negotiation fully armed. It's perfectly possible for two RICS valuers to come to different views about the right rent for the pub. So that it is a negotiation, and the power of the code is about informing tenants so that they go into any negotiation with their eyes wide open.
We've had a statutory review of the code, and I now see that there are some amendments that they're seeking to consult on. Are any of those proposals or amendments areas that you think would be of particular benefit to tenants?
Look, one of the proposals that's out for consultation is about simplifying the MRO process and how that could be done. And to my mind, that is really crucial. Tenants don't want a complicated process. They don't want to be tied up in different stages. They want to be able to progress smoothly and efficiently with an opportunity for negotiation. So that's, pretty important from my point of view. There's also in the consultation an invitation for views about changing the appeal route from arbitrations away from the High Court. Now, further legislation would be needed to do that, but this is an opportunity to put views forward on that. Because if arbitration is off-putting to tenants, well, an appeal to the High Court of that arbitration award is, can only make that a much more attractive, much less attractive dispute resolution process. So we've, I'll be putting my views forward about that, and you can probably guess what they are.
Yeah, as somebody who's personally been put in that position, I can tell you it's a very unattractive place to be. So I can almost hear the voices behind me going, you're talking about the review, Nick, but they've missed one key area out. And that key area is the compensation for tenants for lost profits if they get an MRO beyond the review date. And I'm still at a loss to know why they've missed it out, and I can hear people shouting at me now going, yes, they've missed it out, what about our compensation? So is there a reason why you think they've missed that out?
Look, that's a matter for the Secretary of State. I'm here to enforce the code as it is. The Secretary of State decided not to do anything about that matter in the last statutory review. There's another statutory review next year. If people want to, they can put forward their opinions. But don't forget that there is provision in the code which prevents the landlord from increasing the tied rent during the MRO process and increasing and only increasing it if the tenant doesn't go free of tie at the end of it. So there is a financial incentive on the pub owning business to get on with it. But well, I completely appreciate where you're coming from, Nick. And I completely appreciate it's also my job, using the regulatory powers at my disposal, to get this process from where we are to where it could be. And we're not there yet. But it is, I hope you will acknowledge, better than it was in the early days. Tenants are getting through this process. They are, I've got first-hand accounts of tenants putting big money in their pockets as a result of having used the MRO process effectively. You know, the work continues.
Yeah, I can see the change as somebody who was involved with an MRO or a number of MROs at the start of it. It was big money coming out of tenants' pockets, and now it's big money going into tenants' pockets, and that was the whole point of it. So we have moved. I think there's still a long way to go, and I've just raised one of the key areas that I think many people will be focusing on. And whilst I understand it's not your remit, we on this side of the fence have to urge tenants to get involved with the further statutory reviews that come along to make sure that that point is made.
Absolutely, I'd really encourage you know, any tenants and other stakeholders to look at the statutory review document and put in their views.
Yeah, can I turn to non-MRO areas? Tenants obviously have other rights under the code, and I've noticed recently that you've been looking quite hard at one of my particular bugbears, which is buildings insurance.
Yeah.
Do you think we've done enough to highlight tenants' rights in this area? And do you think that even if they are aware of their rights, the process is easy enough for them?
Well, this is a really important issue for me as well. I've only started talking about these insurance rights since the second half of last year. And we've got a lot to do to raise awareness. I've just done a quick pulse survey around insurance, and it does tell me that awareness is still too low. But interestingly, what it does tell me is that when tenants are aware and do seek to you know, use their price matching right, there are you know, a significant number of tenants who are succeeding and putting money in their pockets. So this is a really important right that I need to push out there so that tenants understand it, so that the market turns around, so that it's easier for tenants to get these their own quotes, and to make sure that the pub owning businesses are operating that compliance function effectively.
Yeah, I mean, it has been notoriously difficult for tenants to actually avail themselves of those rights. I think because getting the quotes themselves actually is tough. So I'd be really interested to follow this up and see how it progresses.
Well, yes, and what I would say to tenants is, you know, of course, the place to start is the person that's doing your business insurance, because if you've got an existing relationship with them around your business insurance, you know, they may be the right person and willing to help you get a buildings quote, which you can use for price matching if it's lower, of course.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we've been doing. I mean, we've been helping a number of tenants in that regard, and that's exactly the route that we've taken through our advisors to try and get people some quotes. So yeah, I completely agree. You've mentioned that there's another review coming over the hill, and the legislation is likely to evolve, and you know, and it should, all things evolve. one of the areas that's been highlighted to me recently, and I'm getting a growing number of questions about it, is about the sub 500 pub companies, those that don't fall under your remit and are self-regulation. The vast majority of these companies, as I see it, are absolutely fine, and self-regulation works really, really well. Perhaps I would say that because I sit on the pub governing body, but I believe it that most of them work really, really well within that. But there are a couple of outliers, and certain names keep cropping up and up over and over onto my desk, and there seems to be a little trend, which means that it could mean two things. It could mean that these pub companies, and they tend to be the larger ones, are falling into the bad habits that the regulated pub companies fell into prior to their pubs code. Or it could mean that tenants are starting to understand their rights within the code, particularly multiple operators this would apply to, and wish to see those code rights extended out, which it's a double-edged sword really. One is a bad sign and one is perhaps a good sign.
Look, there may be some trickle down into the sub 500 pub companies based, as you said, on tenants of regulated companies coming to understand the sort of practices they'd expect. But my remit is the pubs code as it is. The Secretary of State didn't change the 500 tide pub limit in the last statutory review. Again, there's another statutory review opportunity next year, and I would say that if people have observations to make, they make them, and they back that up with evidence. But I'm not the best person to ask about the behaviour of sub 500 pub companies, because I don't have jurisdiction in relation to them, so I don't get that intelligence, or very little of it. I don't get that data. I'm not focused on them. So really, you need to be asking other people that question.
No, absolutely, and I understand that totally. It's really something that I know people would be expecting me to ask, so I kind of have to ask it. Okay, just finally, Fiona, you've come into our wonderful industry. I am one of those long in the tooth, worked in it nearly all my life, people that you mentioned earlier on. How have you found working with us? How have you found pubs, publicans, and has your perception changed of us since starting to work alongside us?
My biggest impression of publicans is how hard they work, how many hours they do, how busy they are, how much they have to put into their businesses to make them successful. And so, I'm constantly aware of the challenge I've got to get information to them in a way that they can understand and absorb and apply in their businesses easily and successfully. So, I'm impressed with all of their dedication, and the dedication of all the people that have put so much into keeping the sector going over the last 15 months. It's been an extraordinary period. Now things are firing up again. The rent reviews are happening. People are starting to think again about their MRO options. And I need to be there. I need to be ready to get that information to them so that they have as much support as they can to make their business a success, because that's part of their COVID recovery. Am I enjoying it? Yes, it's an absolute privilege doing the job that I do. I've got a long-term view and I'm here for the duration, and I'm absolutely determined that these code principles of fair and lawful dealing, and no worse off than if you are free of tie, are embedded at every stage of their code rights.
Again, I can't disagree with any of that. Some of the hardest working people that I know work in the pub industry, I'm sure people will say, well, you would say that, Nick, wouldn't you? But when you work within this industry, you know how hard people work. They really really are, particularly those at the coalface, really are hardworking individuals. And because they're so hardworking, part of the key elements for me is that, as you've rightly pointed out earlier, is communication to them and making their access to their rights as easy as possible. These are time poor people, and we need to make life as easy as we can, which I think I'm really pleased to see that you've grasped that, and that's great. Also really pleased to hear that you love working within the industry and you've got a long-term view, which is fantastic. Just to draw us to an end, we've done 5 years. Hopefully in 5 years' time, we will get to the Crown in Stamford, and we can have a Q&A about...
Sooner than that, please, Nick. I'm really willing to engage like this. I'm really happy to have conversations like this, and you know, let's do it again and talk about where we've got to and what lies ahead.
Brilliant. It's been really informative. Thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you have too. And as I say, look forward to the next one.
I have enjoyed it, Nick. Thanks very much. Thank you.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.
Take care.